"Mom, if you can't support us, then you need to leave. Right now." The room fell silent as 73-year-old Evelyn looked from her son to the guests who suddenly found their shoes fascinating. She set her untouched champagne glass on the nearest table and offered a small, sorrowful smile. "I hope one day you'll understand why I couldn't say yes." No argument followed. No raised voice. No dramatic exit. She simply turned, walked toward the door, and disappeared into the evening. Behind her, whispers spread faster than music, and every smiling conversation collapsed beneath the weight of one impossible moment. If you've ever wondered how a loving family can fracture over a single decision, stay with me. This story isn't about revenge. It's about promises kept, painful choices, and the quiet strength to endure being misunderstood. Because what happened 6 weeks later changed every life in that room. The truth wasn't hidden in angry words. It waited inside something far more ordinary, something almost everyone had overlooked. By the time the final piece surfaced, one broken engagement, one mother's silence, and one carefully protected promise would force everyone to confront the difference between control and protection. Before you judge Evelyn, listen to every choice that brought her here. Nothing happened by accident. Every document, every conversation, and every silence mattered. The answer began long before that unforgettable evening, and it would reveal whether love sometimes demands the courage to be misunderstood until truth finally catches up with those we cherish. Years earlier, Evelyn never imagined one ordinary phone call would divide her life into before and after. At 48, she lost her husband, Michael, without warning. Grief arrived suddenly, but bills, responsibilities, and motherhood refused to wait. Their only son, Daniel, still needed guidance, stability, and hope. Michael had spent decades building a respected manufacturing company. After his death, the business was eventually sold, creating a carefully structured $4 million family trust. Yet Michael never intended it to become effortless spending money. Before signing his final documents, he personally established strict conditions. Daniel would need financial maturity, independent legal advice, protection from marital influence, and carefully staged distribution spread across many years. Michael chose Evelyn as trustee because he trusted her judgment, not because she desired authority. She honored that responsibility faithfully. She never used a single dollar for herself. Instead, she quietly paid Daniel's university tuition, helped secure his first apartment, supported graduate school, contributed toward a down payment, and covered unexpected emergency loans whenever life turned difficult. She never listed those sacrifices, expected gratitude, or reminded him how many obstacles she quietly removed from his path. Daniel grew believing security simply existed. Tuition was paid. Rent was manageable. Opportunities appeared when they were needed most. He rarely saw the careful budgeting, legal paperwork, or sleepless nights behind those blessings, because Evelyn protected him from burdens she believed a loving parent should carry. She accepted that invisible work often received no applause. She kept every receipt, every statement, and every annual trust report neatly filed, believing accountability mattered more than appearances. Friends occasionally praised her strength, yet she brushed aside compliments and changed the subject. Her satisfaction came from seeing Daniel move forward with confidence, never realizing that constant protection can sometimes make sacrifice appear effortless instead of extraordinary. That quiet illusion would shape every heartbreaking decision still ahead. Daniel met Vanessa during a charity fundraiser hosted by mutual friends. She was warm, attentive, and effortlessly polite. She remembered birthdays, thanked waiters, and spoke kindly to everyone. Evelyn genuinely believed her son had found someone thoughtful and compassionate. For several months, nothing seemed unusual. Then small, almost harmless questions began. "I just don't understand why your mother still controls your inheritance." Another evening came the remark, "You deserve your own money." Later, she laughed lightly and added, "It's strange a grown man needs permission." None of the comments sounded openly cruel. That was exactly why they worked. Each one settled quietly, encouraging Daniel to question something he had never doubted. Family dinners gradually changed. Conversations that once wandered through memories and ordinary life kept circling back to the trust. Vanessa asked careful questions about trust documents, payout schedules, trustee authority, and estate planning. Whenever Evelyn hesitated before answering, Vanessa smiled and insisted she was just planning their future. Evelyn noticed Daniel growing impatient whenever money entered the conversation. His tone became shorter. His questions became sharper. He no longer asked how the trust worked. Instead, he asked why it could not be changed. She refused to argue. She simply answered with the same quiet sentence every time. "I'm following your father's instructions." Daniel heard something entirely different. In his mind, those words slowly became, "My mother doesn't trust me." Evelyn recognized the painful misunderstanding taking root. Yet she believed patience would eventually overcome suspicion. She underestimated how easily repeated suggestions could reshape someone's thinking when they came from the person he loved most. Vanessa never demanded control outright. She merely planted one reasonable question after another until doubt sounded like common sense. By then, Daniel no longer realized which thoughts were truly his own, and Evelyn sensed an invisible distance growing between them that no simple conversation seemed able to bridge. Still, Evelyn chose kindness over confrontation. She believed facts would matter when the right moment arrived. Unfortunately, someone else was carefully shaping the story first, and Daniel never noticed the quiet turning point unfolding before his own eyes, setting the stage for heartbreak neither parent expected ahead. Together, as Daniel and Vanessa grew more serious, the conversations about the trust became impossible to avoid. What had once sounded like casual curiosity turned into regular requests. Vanessa encouraged Daniel to ask whether the remaining restrictions could be lifted early. She insisted that exceptional circumstances deserved exceptional treatment, especially with a wedding approaching. Evelyn patiently explained that the trust conditions were legally binding and reflected Michael's written wishes. They were not hers to rewrite. Daniel accepted the answer the first few times, but each new conversation ended with the same disappointment. Before long, he was asking again and again, hoping persistence might accomplish what the documents would not allow. Every calm refusal left him more frustrated than the last. The changes spread beyond discussions about money. Wedding plans moved forward without Evelyn being asked for her thoughts. Decisions she once would have shared with excitement reached her only after they had already been made. Her suggestions were politely dismissed. Phone calls that had once lasted an hour became hurried conversations ending after only a few minutes. Holiday visits felt less like joyful traditions and more like obligations squeezed into busy schedules. Then came the engagement dinner. With friends and relatives gathered around the table, Vanessa raised her glass and laughed. "We'll finally be free once the paperwork's finished." A few guests smiled uncertainly. Others lowered their eyes. The joke lingered longer than the laughter. Evelyn looked toward Daniel, expecting him to soften the remark or gently defend her. Instead, he remained silent, staring into his drink as though saying nothing would somehow keep the peace. For the first time, Evelyn questioned whether her silence was protecting her son or allowing resentment to grow unchecked. She could have reminded everyone that the trust belonged to Michael's legacy, not to her personal wishes. She could have corrected every misunderstanding in that room. Instead, she quietly smiled, changed the subject, and carried the weight alone. She believed dignity required patience, but each unanswered accusation made that patience harder to bear. She still hoped time would reveal the truth before irreversible damage was done. A few days after the uncomfortable engagement dinner, Evelyn received an email she immediately realized had been sent to the wrong address. Attached was a vendor invoice intended for Daniel, detailing wedding expenses far beyond anything they had previously discussed. Buried among the ordinary charges were notes referencing expected funding immediately after asset availability, wording that struck her as strangely specific. She closed the file without drawing conclusions, but the phrase lingered in her mind. Not long afterward, Daniel asked her to attend a meeting with the family's attorney to review routine trust paperwork. During the discussion, he stepped out briefly to answer a phone call. Left alone in the conference room, Evelyn noticed an open folder resting near the attorney's files. She had no intention of searching through private documents, yet the top page clearly displayed Vanessa's name beside a request for information about trust liquidation options and accelerated distributions. The attorney returned before Daniel did and quietly collected the folder. Later, while waiting in the reception area, Evelyn unintentionally overheard part of a conversation between the attorney and an assistant. The attorney calmly explained that the trust could not legally be accelerated, without violating the written instructions Michael had personally signed years before. Any attempt to bypass those conditions would expose everyone involved to serious legal consequences. The scattered pieces suddenly formed a complete picture. Vanessa's repeated questions had never been simple curiosity about budgeting or wedding planning. She wanted immediate access to protected assets before the marriage took place, despite knowing the trust had been deliberately designed to prevent exactly that situation. Evelyn felt no anger, only profound sadness. She finally understood why every conversation had become centered on paperwork instead of family. Saying yes would not honor Daniel's future. It would betray Michael's final wishes and the responsibility he had placed in her hands. As she left the office, she carried a quiet certainty that Daniel still lacked, and she feared discovering the truth would cost him far more than he imagined. Before long, that painful knowledge would force an impossible choice every parent dreads. That evening, Evelyn returned home carrying more than a folder full of legal papers. She carried the quiet weight of certainty. She knew the days ahead would test every promise she had ever made, and before making another difficult decision, she needed to face the past with complete honesty. She opened the cabinet where she kept decades of carefully labeled files. One by one, she spread them across the dining room table. There were tuition invoices from Daniel's university years, receipts for graduate school expenses, records of mortgage contributions, copies of emergency bank transfers, and even notes she had tucked inside birthday cards with checks meant to ease whatever burden he faced at the time. She did not study those papers because she expected gratitude or repayment. She already knew neither would come. Instead, she searched for reassurance that every sacrifice had been made from love rather than obligation. Each document reminded her of a moment when protecting Daniel had mattered more than protecting herself. Hours passed before she leaned back and closed the final folder. 25 years of quiet decision stretched before her like chapters in a life few people had ever noticed. She had preserved Michael's legacy exactly as he intended while giving Daniel every opportunity she could without compromising the trust itself. For the first time since Michael's death, Evelyn allowed herself to admit how lonely that responsibility had been. No one applauded restraint. No one celebrated the promises that required saying no instead of yes. When she finally switched off the dining room light, her decision was complete. She would not sign anything that violated the trust. She would not rewrite Michael's wishes to satisfy temporary pressure. Even if Daniel believed she had betrayed him, she would carry that misunderstanding rather than betray the man who had trusted her above everyone else. She whispered a quiet goodnight to the empty house, knowing the greatest price of keeping her promise might be losing her son's faith before he ever understood why. The engagement party had been planned as an evening of celebration, laughter, and hopeful beginnings. Soft music drifted through the room while friends and relatives admired the decorations Vanessa had spent months arranging. From a distance, everything looked perfect. Only Evelyn understood the quiet tension hiding beneath every polite smile. She greeted guests warmly, accepted congratulations, and did her best to keep the attention where it belonged. For a little while, she almost believed the evening might pass without another conversation about the trust. Then Vanessa lifted her glass and gently tapped it with a spoon. "I think this is the perfect time," she said with a bright smile. "We're all family here." Every conversation stopped. Daniel stepped beside her, holding a document inside a slim folder. His expression revealed both hope and frustration. "Mom," he said quietly, "will you sign today?" The room seemed to shrink around them. Evelyn looked at the familiar paperwork without touching it. She already knew what it requested and why she could never agree. Her voice remained calm. "No." The single word landed heavier than anyone expected. Vanessa's smile disappeared. "I don't understand why you're still trying to control Daniel's future," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is his life, not yours." Several guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. Evelyn answered gently, "I'm honoring a promise I cannot break." Daniel's face reddened. Embarrassment replaced patience as dozens of eyes settled on him. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're choosing paperwork over your own son?" She wanted to explain everything. She wanted to tell him what she had discovered, remind him of his father's wishes, and protect him from the mistake he could not yet see. But exposing suspicions without proof in front of their guests would only deepen the wound. Instead, she remained silent. Daniel took a slow breath before speaking the words that would echo in Evelyn's memory forever. "Mom, if you can't support us, then you need to leave. Right now." She placed her untouched champagne glass on the nearest table and offered him a sorrowful smile. "I hope one day you'll understand why I couldn't say yes." Without another word, she walked toward the door. Behind her, uneasy whispers replaced celebration. Several guests exchanged troubled glances, while an older family friend quietly watched the entire exchange without saying a word. No one realized that the painful scene they had just witnessed was not the ending of the story, but the beginning of the truth. Several weeks later, the excitement surrounding the wedding began to fade. Vendors requested confirmations that never came, appointments were postponed, and Daniel found himself sorting through emails and financial correspondence that once seemed routine. The more carefully he read, the more small inconsistencies appeared. One message referred to trust funds as though they would become immediately available after the wedding. Another mentioned conversations that Daniel could not remember having. Confused, he scheduled a meeting with the family's attorney. The attorney patiently reviewed the trust documents line by line. He explained that Michael had deliberately written strict conditions preventing accelerated distributions. Those protections were legally binding, and Evelyn possessed no authority to ignore them. She had never been withholding money out of personal preference. She had simply fulfilled the legal responsibility entrusted to her. Daniel left the office shaken. Every conversation with his mother suddenly sounded different. Her repeated insistence that she was following his father's instructions had been the truth all along. When Daniel confronted Vanessa with the documents and the attorney's explanation, she finally admitted she had expected the trust to become accessible once they were married. She believed the restrictions could eventually be worked around if enough pressure was applied. The confession ended the engagement, not with shouting or dramatic accusations, but with the quiet collapse of trust. Daniel realized the woman he loved had misunderstood, or ignored, the very safeguards his father had created. At the same time, he recognized something even more painful. His mother had endured public humiliation, rather than violate a promise she considered sacred. Standing alone afterward, Daniel understood that the inheritance had never truly been the issue. Character had been. Evelyn had protected both his future and his father's legacy, while he had mistaken unwavering integrity for control. Now he faced two losses at once: the relationship he thought would last forever, and the trust of the mother who had never stopped loving him. He knew earning her forgiveness would require patience, humility, consistent actions, because apologies alone could never suffice again. Months later, Daniel knocked on Evelyn's front door carrying nothing except quiet regret. She welcomed him inside, brewed tea, and waited. There were no dramatic speeches, no excuses, and no demands. Daniel simply apologized for believing the worst about the woman who had spent her life protecting him. Evelyn accepted his apology, but she gently explained that trust returned slowly. They began sharing weekly dinners again, allowing ordinary conversations to replace painful silence. The trust remained unchanged, its rules exactly as Michael had written. Some wounds healed, while others remained quiet reminders of choices that could never be undone. Evelyn finally found peace because she had honored both her husband's memory and her own conscience. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it became stronger through consistent honesty, patient forgiveness, shared meals, renewed respect, careful listening, and the understanding that love survives when integrity never yields. Each visit reminded them healing grows through faithful choices, not forgotten pain, but renewed commitment together. Sometimes the people protecting us look like the ones standing in our way. Real love doesn't always say yes. Sometimes it accepts misunderstanding to prevent lasting harm. If Evelyn taught us anything, it's that integrity sometimes costs us before it rewards us. If you were Evelyn, would you have protected the trust even if it meant losing your child's trust for a while? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments and subscribe today.